everybody, welcome back to number 2 of 7 Ableton tips to improve your workflow. Let's get straight into it. This one's all about making the process of recording your audio really fast, really efficient and really familiar. When inserting new audio tracks and MIDI tracks, I quite often find myself putting the same effects on. So I found that setting a default track with parameters that suit my recording style is really useful and saves quite a lot of time messing around putting various things on. So this is how you do it. Just starting with a blank template here and a regular default audio track here. The first thing I normally find is that when you put effects on or samples, and on when we get to doing the MIDI track, when you put an instrument on, quite often the preset or any other amount of effects on the track on that particular plugin is quite loud. So what I always find myself doing is turning the volume down a little bit at least. So wouldn't it be good, wouldn't it be handy just to save a few seconds, because it all counts, to have an audio track that was less than 0 dB to start with. So what we do is drag this down. My go-to one is just to make it exact here, because I'm a bit anal like that. -6 dB I find gives enough headroom. The second thing, whatever I put on an audio track, I always end up EQing it to some extent. So let's have an EQ 8 on here, and the standard seems to give us this shelf. So what I'm going to do is put a low cut on there. I'm just going to leave it, the rest of it. And the second one is a compressor. I'm just going to leave the default settings there. The last thing to do is just to disable both of them, because whatever I put on the audio track, I don't want it to be immediately affected by any presets on here, particularly compression. So every time we insert a new audio track, these will be disabled and you can switch them on as and when you need to. So far we've got the -6 dB and fixed FX here that I personally find myself using a lot, disabled. Next thing, this is a personal preference for me. You don't have to do this, or it can be any other color you like. I'm going to make all my audio tracks, or newly inserted audio tracks, red. This is just a visual thing to separate them from the green that I'm going to make the MIDI channel in a minute. Right click, scroll to the bottom, save as default audio track. This will pop up if you've made one of these before. Just click yes. There we go. Now with Command T, every time I make a new audio track, you can see the settings are just as we've saved them. -6 dB for me, and they've all got disabled EQ and a compressor ready to go. Just increases workflow. When I make a default MIDI track, it's almost the exact same process, but there's just one or two little things that you need to do differently. Okay, so Command Shift and T to create a new MIDI track. The first thing you'll notice straight away is because it's just a blank MIDI channel with no instrument or device on here, I can't adjust the volume of it. To get around that, I'm going to drag in an audio effect rack. This allows us to change the volume. So once again, I'm going to make this -6. Again, my personal preference, you can make it whatever you like. I'm going to hide the macro and the chain section. I'm going to drag in an EQ, again, changing the shelf to a low cut, just because that's the most common thing that I'm likely to do to almost any instrument or sample or sound. And we're just going to drop it right next to the EQ. There we go. So we have an audio effect rack here grouped together. I could have done exactly the same thing with an instrument rack, but the reason I don't is because every time I insert a new MIDI track, I want it to be called MIDI. And if you have an instrument rack as the default, then every time you insert a new one, it doesn't call it MIDI, it calls it instrument rack. And it's just, for my personal preference, a quick visual tool to see what is audio and what is MIDI when I'm loading things up. From here, all you would need to do is then just drop in your instrument of choice in the front, and obviously the effects are going to affect that. Let's just delete that for now. And I'm going to make these MIDI ones green. Again, just a visual tool to see a clear difference when you're looking at a bank of them. So we've got the -6, and we have the audio effect rack with my most preferred effects that I'm going to be using a lot of the time. Going to disable those again, because just in case we don't want to use them, they're not going to affect it straight away. And the last thing to do that's slightly different again on a MIDI track is I'm going to make sure that it's record enabled down here, just so that you can start playing the instrument straight away. You don't have to think, oh, why is there no sound coming out? So just make sure it's record enabled. Same process again, right click at the top, save as default MIDI track. Yes, we're going to overwrite whichever ones we've done before, or the original one. And there we go. So Command Shift T, and there we have loads of MIDI tracks ready to roll, all with the effects next to the audio ones. So there you go. Look out for tip number 3 next week. Any questions, please put in the comments below. Give it a thumbs up, give me a subscribe, and I'll look forward to speaking to you very soon. Cheers.